Welcome to MysteryCom. Tonight, we'll explore 8 terrifying real encounters with the Men in Black. I hope these mysterious tales, along with the sound of the campfire, help you relax and fall asleep. But before we begin, please consider subscribing, and don't forget to like and share this with your friends. Now, sit back, get comfortable, and let's begin. Puget Sound lay grey and still in the early light. The water lapped gently at the wooden hull, leaving faint salt spray on the windows. The air was damp, cool, with a faint metallic tang that lingered at the back of the throat. Harold Dahl steered the small patrol boat slowly along the edge of Maury Island. His hands rested heavy on the wheel, rough from years of rope and sea. The engine hummed steady beneath his boots, a low throb he hardly noticed anymore. His son leaned against the rail, the sketchpad balanced on his knees. The boy had been drawing clouds since they left the dock, quiet, shoulders hunched. Every so often he pushed his hair back from his eyes without looking up. The dog padded back and forth, restless. Nails clicked on the damp deck, tail stiff. Every now and then he stopped and sniffed the air, ears twitching. It was just another morning. Driftwood checks, log patrols, the same routes repeated. Dahl's mind drifted to chores waiting at home, coils of rope drying in the shed, a leaky faucet in the kitchen. He tugged his coat collar higher against the cold. The horizon blurred in haze. Gulls wheeled overhead, their calls sharp. Then suddenly the gulls were gone, vanished into silence. The radio on the shelf hissed faintly, though it was off. Static that shouldn't have been there. Dahl frowned, glanced once at the dial, then turned back to the water. Routine. That was all it was. Routine. But the silence pressed heavier. Even the boy stopped sketching. The pencil stayed still in his hand, eyes fixed on the empty sky. The dog whined, low in its throat, then sat down stiffly, staring upward. Dahl's hands tightened on the wheel. He swallowed, but the taste in the air had changed, sharper now, like hot metal. Something was there. The sky above Maury Island shifted. 6 round shapes drifted out from a line of low clouds. They hung heavy, darker than the morning grey, and far too steady for birds. They were round, with hollow centres, like giant tires suspended in air. Their surfaces were dull, not shiny, but gave off a strange shimmer as if heat rippled around them. Dahl squinted, wiped his eyes, then looked again. They didn't move with the wind. They didn't sway. They just hovered. The boy lowered his sketchpad slowly. "They look like rings," he whispered. The dog growled, low, claws scraping the deck. Dahl forced a breath through his nose, jaw tight. He told himself it had to be military. Some kind of test. Something explainable. But his chest felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down. One of the objects tilted, almost unsteady. Then a piece broke off, tumbling down. It hit the water with a hiss, steam curling up. More fragments followed, raining in arcs. A glowing piece slammed the deck. Rope burned, wood blackened. The smell was sharp, molten, wrong. The dog yelped, staggered, then collapsed near the rail. The boy cried out, clutching his arm where a shard had grazed him. Skin blistered, raw. Dahl dropped the wheel, grabbed a tarp, tried to drag the dog clear, but the weight was limp, unmoving. Another chunk struck, sparks scattering. The sound was not like metal, not like rock. A ringing hum clung in his ears. He pulled his son to the cabin, wrapped the arm with his sleeve, tied it tight. His hand shook, but his voice stayed flat. "Hold still. Just hold still." The boy's face was pale, lips pressed tight. He nodded, silent. On the deck, fragments glowed dull red. The water shimmered, oily patches spreading wide. The air felt charged, hairs standing on end. Dahl turned the wheel hard, pushing the boat toward shore. The engine roared, fighting against his own shaking grip. He kept glancing back. The objects hadn't followed. They hung in formation, unmoving, as if watching. Minutes stretched. He counted every heartbeat. The boy leaned against him, weak but steady. By the time they reached the dock, the gulls had returned. Their cries rang sharp again, too loud after the silence. Dahl tied off the boat with stiff hands. He lifted his son onto the pier, eyes fixed on the burned wood, the tarp around the dog. He could not shake the thought. They didn't move like machines. They moved like they chose to. That night he sat alone in the shed. The debris lay piled in a crate. Cold to the touch now, heavy and strange, edges sharp as glass. He told himself to report it to someone. But who? The radio in the corner crackled again, though it wasn't turned on. He stared at it until the static faded. Then he turned the light off, closed the door, and sat in darkness. The next morning, the town felt ordinary. Cars moved along the wet streets, storefronts opening, the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from the diner on the corner. Dahl walked in, shoulders hunched, coat damp from drizzle. He slid into a booth and wrapped his hands around a mug, though the coffee burned his tongue. He needed the normal sounds, the clatter of dishes, voices mixing. But his mind kept replaying the night. The crate in the shed. The static from the radio. His son's pale face. The door chime rang. A man stepped inside, tall, dressed in a black suit that looked too pressed for this town. Shoes polished, hat brim low. He moved straight to Dahl's booth and sat without asking. For a moment they just looked at each other. The man's skin was pale, lips thin, eyes unreadable under the shadow of his hat. "You saw something yesterday," the man said quietly. Dahl's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken a word to anyone. The man leaned in slightly. His voice was flat, without accent. 6 objects. 1 dropped debris. Your son was hurt. Your dog is dead. Dahl's hand froze on the mug. His mind raced. How could he know? You should forget it, the man said. Nothing good follows if you don't. The man didn't sip the coffee set in front of him. It sat untouched, no steam rising. Dahl felt pressure in his ears again, like climbing a mountain too fast. A faint buzzing in his teeth. He clenched his jaw. He wanted to tell him to leave, but no words came. The man's gaze didn't break. He spoke slowly, evenly. You understand. Dahl nodded once, more instinct than choice. Then the man stood. His shoes made no sound on the floor as he walked to the door. The chime rang as he left, but when Dahl looked out the window, the street was empty. He turned back. The coffee cup was still there, but the liquid inside was cold, as if it had been sitting for hours. That night, Dahl locked the shed tight. He told himself it was for safety, to keep his son out. But the truth pressed heavier. When he walked past the radio, static surged again. Not loud, but sharp enough to raise the hairs on his arms. His son watched from the doorway. "Why do you keep it locked?" the boy asked softly. Dahl didn't answer. He tightened the padlock, then turned away. The boy's eyes stayed on him, searching. Dahl looked down at his own hands. They trembled when he held the key. He thought about the man's voice, the way he had known every detail. He thought about the silence on the water, the way those objects had hovered as if waiting. He lay awake long after midnight. Every small sound made him flinch. The static returned in bursts. And he realized someone or something was still watching. Evening settled over the dock. The water slapped against the pilings in slow rhythm, carrying the smell of seaweed and diesel. Dahl sat on a bench, coat pulled tight. His son's bandaged arm rested across his lap, the boy dozing against his shoulder. The sound of the waves should have been calming, but each ripple seemed sharp, deliberate. He looked out across Puget Sound. The horizon blurred into a thin strip of fading light. No gulls circled. The sky felt too still. He thought of the man in the diner, the voice that knew too much, the eyes that didn't blink, the cup of coffee that turned cold in seconds. His hand drifted to the key in his pocket, the shed lock cold against his memory. Inside was the crate of fragments. Sharp edges, burnt smell that clung to the air even hours later. The boy stirred. "Are we safe?" he whispered, eyes half closed. Dahl swallowed, kept his voice steady. "We're fine." The lie sat heavy on his tongue. He felt the static again, faint but real, as if the air itself buzzed against his skin. He stayed silent after that. The boy leaned closer, trusting, unaware of the weight pressing on his father's chest. Dahl's eyes stayed on the water until the light was gone. He understood now. Ordinary men were not meant to see extraordinary things. He breathed in, the taste of salt laced with something metallic. Life would go on. Quieter. But I watched. Bridgeport, Connecticut. Summer of 1953. A small attic room above a narrow street where the houses leaned close together. The air held the faint smell of dust, ink, and warm wood. Albert sat at his desk, a chipped mug of tea cooling by his elbow. The lamp hummed softly, its circle of light catching the edges of stacked papers and envelopes. Letters from England, Australia, and South America lay bundled with string, all sent to the International Flying Saucer Bureau. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The attic was close and still, with only the night crickets outside filling the silence. On some evenings, the dogs in the neighborhood barked, then went silent all at once. Tonight, the crickets carried on, though there was a faint ringing in his ears, like a change in air pressure before a storm. He shook it off and went back to writing. Ink scratching on paper, careful notes about sightings, drawings copied from reports. His hand paused when the radio across the room crackled. It was unplugged. Just a faint burst, then nothing. He stared at it for a long moment. The attic seemed quieter than before. He pushed the thought away, setting the pen down. His friends had already warned him he was burying himself too deep in this. He told them it was harmless. Only letters. Only research. But when he stood and crossed to the window, looking down on the empty street, he felt it again. The sense that someone was watching, though no one stood there. He stayed a long time by the glass before returning to his desk. Routine. That was all that mattered. Keep writing. Keep the Bureau alive. Still, as he bent back over the papers, the silence pressed a little harder against his ears. The days blurred into the same rhythm. Albert walked home from work, climbed the narrow stairs, and settled in the attic. Papers, letters, reports. Always the same circle of light from the desk lamp. Yet small things kept slipping into the edges of his nights. Static on the radio, even when disconnected. A faint pop in his ears, as if pressure shifted in the room. One evening he stopped halfway up the stairs, certain he heard someone on the landing above. Slow steps. When he pushed open the attic door, the room was still. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wires left too long on a hot stove. He shook his head and sat at the desk. Ink flowed, steady and sure, though his hand trembled slightly. He told himself it was fatigue, nothing more. Letters from members of the Bureau piled higher. One from Gray encouraged him. "Do not stop now," it read in tight script. Albert folded it carefully, slipping it into a drawer. He wished he felt that sure. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of men by the street when he returned home. standing by the fence or a cross near the corner. When he looked again, they were gone. At night, silence grew thick. The crickets stopped. The dogs hushed. He would sit up in bed, breath shallow, straining to hear anything. Nothing came. Just the taste of metal in the air. Dreams followed. Always the same. 3 shapes, tall and narrow, faces shadowed beneath hats. They stood still, only their eyes catching light. The dreams left him with tightness in his chest, sweat cold against his back. He tried to keep writing, tried to keep the bureau alive. But the pages came slower now. His thoughts tangled, heavy with unease. Once, while sealing envelopes, the radio snapped on by itself. A sharp burst of static filled the attic. He froze, watching the dial glow faintly, though the cord hung loose. Then silence. He pushed the envelopes aside. His pulse thudded in his ears. He whispered to himself, "Not tonight." The attic no longer felt like a place of work. It felt like a place of waiting. The night of the storm came quiet at first. Rain tapped at the window, slow and steady, a rhythm that should have been comforting. Albert sat at the desk, pen idle in his hand. Then his ears popped, sharp and sudden, as if he had climbed a mountain. He swallowed hard, trying to clear it, but the pressure only grew. The attic light flickered, shadows stretching long across the walls. He turned toward the radio. It crackled alive, though no cord touched the outlet. Static hissed, rising and falling like distant waves. Albert stood. His hands trembled. He thought of running down the stairs, out the door, anywhere. His legs refused. The room darkened at the edges. He blinked. 3 figures stood in the far corner. Black suits, Homburg hats, still as statues. His chest tightened. The smell of burnt metal filled the air, sharp in the back of his throat. His breath came shallow, uneven. The figures moved closer without sound. Not walking, but gliding, a smooth drift over the floorboards. Their eyes caught the lamplight, shining like pale bulbs. Albert gripped the edge of the desk. His knuckles whitened. One figure leaned slightly forward. No lips moved, yet the words came deep and slow inside his head. "Stop publishing." The voice rattled through him, not in his ears but in his bones. A second voice joined, layered over the first. "Stop speaking." His thoughts scattered. He wanted to ask why, but no words came. His throat was dry, his tongue heavy. The third voice pressed harder, filling the attic until he thought the air might split. "You have seen enough." His legs weakened. He dropped into the chair, sweat rolling cold down his back. He tried to look away, but his eyes held fast. The 3 men hovered just beyond arm's reach, their faces pale, expressionless, eyes glowing steady. Albert's mind clawed for sense. Dream, illusion, stress. But the weight of their presence crushed every doubt. Then, as sudden as they had come, they were gone. The lamp steadied, casting the room in its ordinary circle of light. The radio went silent. Only the smell of ozone lingered. Albert gasped, his chest heaving, ears ringing in the silence. He glanced at the clock. Nearly an hour had passed, though it felt like minutes. He pressed his palms against the desk, whispering to himself, "No more. I can't." The papers lay scattered before him, names and reports, the work of years. He stared at them, his hands trembling. He knew. It was over. The attic sat in silence. The papers lay untouched, corners curling in the damp air. Albert did not go back to them. Not that night, not the nights after. He walked the streets slower, keeping his head low. Neighbors waved, asked if the bureau was still running. He only gave a tight nod, saying little. His friends wrote, asking why the next bulletin had not arrived. He left their letters on the table unopened. In the end, he sent out one final note. A short line to every member. The matter is closed. He boxed his files, sealing them without ceremony. The desk stayed bare. The attic no longer hummed with late-night work, only held the stale weight of memory. Still, the silence followed him. Sometimes, while walking home, he felt it again, the sudden pressure in his ears, the stillness of animals before he turned the key in his door. At those moments, his chest tightened, his thoughts flickered back to the glow of those eyes in the lamplight. He told no one. He did not speak of the men again. To continue would mean inviting them back. So he lived quietly. The town had gone quiet after sundown. Point Pleasant rested under a pale autumn moon, its storefronts already dark, the last neon buzzing weakly before giving out. The air smelled faintly of coal smoke drifting down from the hills. He stood outside his garage, wiping his hands on a rag. The workday was finished, tools lined up, door locked. He liked that rhythm, simple and steady. Nothing out of place. Across the street, the houses looked still, curtains drawn. A dog barked once, then stopped mid-note as if the sound had been cut short. He paused, listening. The silence afterward felt too deep. He lit a cigarette, leaning on the truck hood. The night pressed close, sharper than usual, carrying a slight metallic tang. He shifted his jaw. The pressure in his ears made it feel like a storm might be rolling in. Inside the garage, his radio hissed suddenly, static buzzing for a few seconds before clearing. He glanced at it through the window, uneasy but brushing it off. Radios did that sometimes. His wife would be home, putting their daughter to bed by now. He thought of her reading aloud, a soft voice drifting through the old wooden walls. That thought steadied him. Still, he found himself staring down the road. The street lamps stretched out, pools of yellow light against the dark, but something about them looked strange tonight. The edges flickered. The spaces in between felt heavier. He shook his head, ground the cigarette under his boot, and told himself it was nothing. Just another night in a quiet town. He slid into his truck, engine still cooling under the hood. That was when he noticed it. Across the street, under the broken lamp, a black Cadillac sat. Too new for the town. Too polished. Not a dent or speck of dust. The windows were tinted dark, but he could see the faint outline of two men inside. They weren't moving. Just watching. He frowned, shifted in his seat, and looked again. The car didn't belong here. Nobody drove something like that in a mining town. Not unless they wanted to be noticed. He locked his truck, pretending it was nothing, and started toward home. His boots crunched on gravel. With each step, the metallic taste in the air grew stronger. His stomach tightened. The Cadillac doors opened at the same time. Two men stepped out together, like they had practiced it. Both tall. Both pale. Black suits too crisp for the dusty street. Hats pulled low. They crossed toward him without hurry. Their movements were steady but not quite right. Too smooth in one moment, too stiff in the next. One of them spoke first. "You have seen lights." The voice was polite, but it sounded rehearsed, like someone reading a line. He shook his head slowly. "No. Not me." The second man tilted his head, studying him. "Others have spoken." The words hung heavy. He could hear the faint buzz of the street lamp above, then silence as it flickered out. His chest felt tight, like the air had thinned. He thought of his wife, his little girl asleep. He wished he had just gone inside. The first man took a step closer. "You know the river. You know the plant." It wasn't a question. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "Everyone does." The men didn't smile, but their mouths moved as if they tried. The expression never touched their eyes. He wanted to look away, but their gaze held him there, cold and unblinking. A strange thought slid through his mind. These men weren't here to ask. They were here to make sure he stayed quiet. Somewhere in the back of his head, he could still hear his daughter's voice from earlier that night. "Daddy, is the Birdman real?" He had laughed then. Now the memory cut sharp, like a warning he hadn't understood. The men stood still, waiting. He shifted his weight, his hand tightening around the keys in his pocket, the only sound the faint rattle of metal. The street around them was empty. The silence pressed in, thicker than before. He wondered how long they had been watching, and how many others they had already visited. The first man pulled a small notepad from his coat. His hand moved stiffly, pencil scraping across the page. He didn't look down as he wrote. His eyes stayed fixed on him. The second man spoke again. "People here. They have spoken of lights, of the figure." Then he began to list names, one after another. Neighbors, men from the garage, even the pastor's wife. He felt his stomach drop. These were private conversations. Some never spoken outside of kitchens or porches. How could they know? His breath caught in his throat. He shifted back half a step, almost stumbling. The men didn't move closer, but their stillness was worse than a threat. The first man slipped the pencil away. "You will not add to them." His voice was calm, flat, but it carried weight that felt heavier than the words themselves. He swallowed, his mouth dry. "I don't know anything." The second man tilted his head, studying him like a specimen. Then, suddenly, he asked, "Water." The word sounded wrong in his mouth, clipped. He hesitated, then pointed to the garage. "I've got a tap inside." They followed him in. Their steps echoed too evenly on the concrete floor. He filled a glass, hands trembling slightly. The taller man took it, but held it oddly, fingers pressed straight against the sides. He tilted it wrong, spilling some onto the floor. The spill hissed faintly as it hit the cement. A sharp odor rose, not water at all, but something like ozone, wires burning inside a wall. He froze. The man lowered the empty glass, setting it down with careful precision. His pale lips formed something like a smile, thin and mechanical. The air grew heavier. A faint vibration buzzed in his skull, not sound exactly, more like pressure. He clenched his jaw, but it didn't fade. Then the first man leaned close. His voice dropped, low and distorted, words vibrating more than spoken. "Do not speak of the lights. Do not remember the visitor." The sentence rattled inside his head, echoing against bone. For a moment he thought he might black out. The men stepped back in unison. They turned, walked out of the garage, and slid into the Cadillac. The car rolled away without engine noise. The headlights cut through the dark, then vanished around the corner. He stood in the garage doorway, gripping the frame so tight his knuckles ached. The silence outside was absolute. No wind, no crickets, no dogs. Only the lingering metallic tang in the air, and the faint buzz still pressing inside his ears. He knew then that this was not just about intimidation. It was something else, something beyond what he could understand. And they had seen him. He stayed at the doorway until the Cadillac was gone. The street lamp flickered back to life, buzzing faintly as if nothing had happened. But he knew better. His boots felt heavy as he crossed the road toward home. The night air pressed close, still carrying that metallic tang. Each step sounded too loud in the empty street. Inside, the house was warm, the smell of supper still faint in the kitchen. His wife was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled to her chin. In the bedroom, his daughter lay curled tight under the covers, clutching her toy bear. He stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. For a moment, the sound steadied him. He wanted to wake his wife, to tell her everything, but the words stuck. The men's warning echoed again inside his skull. Do not speak. Do not remember. He sat at the edge of the bed, head in his hands. His pulse hammered, but he kept silent. What good would it do to tell her? It would only bring the shadow into their home. Later, when the house had gone still, the radio in the kitchen crackled. A burst of static, sharp and sudden, then silence. He froze, staring into the dark. The weight in the air hadn't lifted. It clung to the walls, to the floor, to his skin. He understood then. The danger wasn't the lights in the sky or the figure by the plant. The danger was being seen. And they had seen him. The road outside Toledo stretched quiet under the summer night. Robert's headlights cut through the dark, bouncing on the blacktop. On both sides, fields rolled into shadow, their outlines fading into the tree line. His hands rested loose on the wheel, the hum of the tires steady. The window was cracked, letting in warm air that smelled faintly of cut grass and hot tar. A single insect clung to the windshield, its wings rattling in the slipstream. He leaned forward, squinting as the radio gave off a faint static. A station had been clear a moment ago, then gone. He tapped the knob, but the noise stayed. His left ear popped like when driving through hills. He swallowed, clearing it. The night had its own kind of silence. Crickets buzzed faintly, steady as breathing. Every few seconds the sound thinned, then came back. He noticed but didn't dwell. It was late, and he was tired. His wife would already be home, maybe reading in bed, maybe asleep. He pictured her light on, the curtain drawn. It gave him a calm, something normal waiting at the end of the drive. The road bent to the left, a sharp corner he knew well. He eased into it, headlights swinging across the empty stretch. For a moment, the asphalt gleamed bare. Then something glinted near the ground ahead, catching light just long enough to make him blink. He didn't have time to think before the impact came. The car jolted, tires squealing against the curve. Robert gripped the wheel, bracing as the bumper clipped something solid but small. The sound was sharp, like metal against metal, not bone or wood. His foot slammed the brake, and the car lurched to a stop. He sat frozen, breath shallow. The radio hissed low static. For a moment he thought the engine had stalled, but the hum was still there, steady. He opened the door, stepped out, shoes crunching gravel at the edge of the road. The night was still. Too still. No crickets now, no wind in the grass. He walked a few steps forward, scanning the ground with his headlights behind him. Only skid marks. No shape in the road, no object. He crouched, hand brushing the asphalt. Warm. Nothing else. His chest tightened, a thought running through his head like a whisper. It was there, I hit something. Why is there nothing? He stood, listening. In the silence, his own breath sounded loud, almost foreign. A faint smell lingered, metallic, sharp like rust. He turned back to the car, forcing himself inside, fingers trembling against the wheel. The drive home was quiet. He watched the mirrors more than the road, expecting lights, movement, anything. But there was nothing, only empty lanes behind him. At home, he told his wife in a flat voice. Car hit something. Nothing was there. She looked up from her book, frowning. Maybe a shadow. You're tired. Go to bed. He nodded, letting the words sit. But he didn't sleep well that night. Days later, he drove back to the same curve. The sun was high, air thick with humidity. He parked at the shoulder, walked slow along the road. Grass bent in places where tires had slid, and near the edge, half buried in dirt, something small caught light. A lump of metal. Rough on one side, smooth on the other. He lifted it, felt its weight, heavier than it looked. He slipped it into his pocket, his hand not leaving it for the rest of the drive. That night, he placed it in a drawer beside his bed. He lay awake, listening to the fan hum, mind circling the memory. If nothing was there, then where did this come from? 3 nights later, a knock rattled the front door at 11. His wife stirred, confused. Robert pulled on his shirt, walked slow down the hallway. 2 men stood on the porch side by side, both in dark suits, too sharp for the late hour. Their faces young, but their eyes didn't match their age. One spoke first, voice calm. "We'd like to ask about your accident." Robert nodded stiffly, holding the door half open. They asked where it happened, what he saw, how hard the car hit. Questions short, clipped. He answered careful, measured, feeling their eyes weigh every word. When they left, he watched them walk to a black Cadillac parked at the curb. It gleamed like new, though it had to be more than a decade old. The license plate number didn't look right. He stood at the window long after they drove off. His wife asked who they were. He said only, "Don't know." But he knew something was wrong. A week passed, and the nights settled into routine again. Robert told himself the visit had been strange but harmless. Maybe insurance men, maybe some government thing he didn't understand. He tried to believe it. Then another knock came. Same hour. The sound carried sharp through the quiet house. His wife stirred in bed, but he was already on his feet, heart racing, before he reached the hall. 2 men stood outside. Not the same ones. These looked different. Their suits pressed tighter, shoes polished. One was darker skinned, heavy-set, with steady eyes. The other was pale, lean, with a faint accent on his tongue when he spoke. "Evening. We'd like to clear something up." Robert hesitated, fingers tight on the doorframe. "About the crash," the pale man said. "You're certain you hit something?" Robert's mind circled. Why again? Why them? He nodded. "Yes." The men shared a glance, subtle but sharp. The heavier one leaned closer, his voice soft. "Or maybe you imagined it." The words settled cold. Robert looked past them, at the Dodge idling at the curb. Newer car, but the headlights didn't flicker, didn't hum like they should. The air felt heavier, pressing against his ears, making his head buzz. They shifted the talk. Smooth, controlled. "You found something, didn't you?" Robert's breath caught. His thoughts tumbled. "Only my wife knows. Only a pro." "How do they?" "It's been sent off," he muttered. Silence stretched. The pale man smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't. The other stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Robert could hear. "If you want your wife to stay as pretty as she is, you'd better get it back." Robert froze, his mouth dry. He stared at them, words stuck. His chest rose fast, shallow. The accent man tilted his head. "Do you understand?" Robert nodded once. His thoughts were a storm. They know? They shouldn't know. They're not supposed to know. The men didn't wait for more. They turned, walking smooth to the Dodge, their movements too precise, steps in rhythm. The door clicks were sharp in the quiet. The car pulled away, its engine hum strange, too smooth, almost like a faint electric whir. Headlights faded faster than they should, swallowed by the night. Robert stayed at the door, hand still pressed to the frame. His ears rang. The silence outside was deep, thick, no dogs barking, no insects. Only the sound of his own breath. He closed the door slow, turning the lock. His wife called from the bedroom, voice muffled. Who was it? He stood in the hallway, staring at nothing. "No one," he said softly. The word felt hollow. The days after blurred together. Morning coffee, work, errands. All of it looked the same as before, but he felt it differently now. Every time the phone rang, he paused before answering. Sometimes the line carried faint static, even when no one spoke. Driving through town, he caught himself checking mirrors too often. A car behind him would slow when he slowed, turn when he turned. He told himself it was a coincidence, but the thought never left. At night, his wife read by the lamp as she always did. She didn't notice the way he sat by the window, the curtain pulled just enough to see the street. No words left his mouth, but his eyes stayed restless, waiting for another knock. The hotel sat on a side street in Niagara Falls. Early spring, the air still sharp with cold. A thin grey light filtered through the lobby windows, turning the carpet a washed-out blue. Shane Sovar leaned against the counter, clipboard in hand. He was mid-30s, broad-shouldered, carrying himself with the quiet stance of someone used to keeping order. He had worked security before, in places far rougher than this, but here he managed guest complaints, bus tours, and pool noise. Most days were simple. Behind the desk, the young clerk clicked through the reservation system. She chewed on a pen, eyes darting up at every sound of the automatic doors. The concierge, older, with thinning hair and glasses, folded brochures for sightseeing tours. His motions were slow, deliberate, like he had done it 1,000 times before. The lobby was quiet. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The vending machine hummed in the corner, dispensing nothing but cans of cola. Chlorine drifted faint from the pool down the hall. Sovar glanced at the glass doors. For a second the reflection looked strange, like heat rippling above asphalt. He blinked, shook it off. Probably the outside air pressing against the warm lobby glass. He scribbled a note on his clipboard. His sighting from days earlier still weighed on him, though he had barely spoken of it since. A bright object over the gorge, silent, impossible. He had told the report straight, and then left it alone. Still, something hung in the air of the lobby that afternoon. Not tension exactly, more like waiting. The day stretched slow. Phones rang now and then, a bus schedule checked, a guest asking about towels. The concierge kept folding brochures into neat stacks, tapping each one flat against the counter. Outside, pigeons gathered on the ledge, their cooing muffled through the glass. The clerk noticed the sudden flutter as they rose all at once, wings beating against the wind. The noise cut off quickly, leaving the air strangely hollow. She frowned and rubbed at her ear. A faint pressure, like driving uphill too fast. She glanced at the concierge, who tugged at his collar as if it were too tight. Neither spoke. The lobby doors slid open with a hiss. 2 men walked in. Tall, identical in height, shoulders squared, suits perfectly black. Their steps landed at the same time, shoes clicking too loud against the tile. The clerk froze. Pale skin. Too pale. Smooth, almost reflective under the fluorescent buzz. No eyebrows. No eyelashes. Their eyes fixed straight ahead. One spoke. "Is your manager present?" Not a question. Flat, clipped. The clerk swallowed, stammered. I'll call him." The men stood still, hands at their sides. Not shifting weight. Not blinking. Sovar appeared from the back office, clipboard tucked under his arm. His first thought was federal agents, but the suits were off somehow. Too sharp. Too clean. He stepped closer, nodding. "Can I help you?" The air tasted faintly metallic, like overheated wires. His ears buzzed with static. The taller one, or maybe just the first to move, tilted his head. "We are here about recent disturbances in the sky." The concierge looked at Sovar. The clerk bit her lip. Sovar forced a half smile. "You'll have to be more specific." No change in their faces. Just silence. Then a perfectly timed echo. Disturbances in the sky. Fluorescent lights above flickered. Only above them. The clerk gripped the counter. Her pulse thudded in her neck. The men stepped forward, in unison, shoes hitting tile at the exact same beat. Too exact. Sovar's throat tightened. He kept his voice steady. "Who are you with?" Neither answered. Their heads turned slowly, scanning the lobby. Movements stiff, mechanical. The air grew heavier. Each breath felt thin. Sovar thought of the object he had reported just days ago. Bright, silent, hanging over the gorge. He had told the truth. And now, this. The men finally spoke again. "You will answer our questions." Same words. Same tone. Same moment. The clerk backed against the wall. The concierge adjusted his glasses with shaking hands. Sovar's mind raced. Were they human? Agents? Machines? He couldn't tell. The lights buzzed louder overhead, and the smell of metal clung to the air. Sovar motioned to the security monitor behind the counter. The screen showed the lobby in real time. The clerk's hands trembling, the concierge clutching his brochures. Sovar himself standing stiff. But the two men, blurred, distorted silhouettes, as if the camera lens bent around them. His pulse quickened. He cleared his throat. "Do you have identification?" The men turned their heads slowly. Perfectly mirrored, their mouths stretched into faint smiles. Teeth even, flat, like they had been pressed into place. The concierge whispered under his breath, "My God!" Then one spoke. "You saw what was not meant for you." The other repeated, same words, same tone. An echo, not a voice. Sovar felt sweat bead on his neck. His mind flashed back to the night near the gorge. Bright light hovering. No sound. His breath catching in his chest as he realized no one else was around. He had thought reporting it was the right thing. Now he wasn't so sure. The clerk's chest heaved. She whispered, barely audible, "They're not real." A high-pitched hum filled the lobby, not from speakers, not from lights. A vibration in the air itself. The phones on the counter blinked, then went black. No signal flashed across the tiny screen. The concierge adjusted his glasses with shaking hands. They're repeating each other. The two men stepped closer, shoes landing in the same instant. "You will not look again." Sovar's legs tensed. For a moment he thought of running, but he didn't move. Couldn't. His body felt anchored, heavy, like gravity itself had deepened. The clerk's inner voice screamed at her to bolt through the back office, out the service door, but her feet refused. Sovar forced his eyes toward the monitors again. Now the feed showed the lobby empty. No pale men, no black suits. Just Sovar the staff, frozen in fear. He blinked hard, looked up. They were still there. His chest tightened. The metallic taste thickened at the back of his throat. The taller one leaned in close, voice almost a whisper now. "You understand?" Sovar's mind stuttered. He thought of soldiers in Iraq, describing drones that looked human at a distance, but not up close. Machines meant to fool the eye. He had dismissed those stories as stress and dust. Now he wasn't sure. The clerk squeezed her hands together until her knuckles whitened. The concierge pressed a palm flat to the counter, steadying himself. The men stood motionless, waiting. Sovar finally managed one word. "Yes." The hum lingered a few seconds more, then began to fade. Silence pressed in. Only the fluorescent lights buzzed faint above their heads. No one dared breathe too loud. The two men straightened, faces blank once more. Their movements snapped back into that stiff, mirrored rhythm. "Thank you," they said together. They turned. Shoes clicked against the tile, in perfect sync. The doors slid open with a hiss, and a cold wind swept into the lobby. The static cut out instantly. The clerk gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. The concierge dropped his brochures, papers fanning across the floor. Sovar stood rooted, clipboard slick with sweat in his grip. Outside, the pigeons returned to the ledge, cooing louder than before. The sudden life of the sound only deepened the silence the men had left behind. Sovar walked to the desk, leaned over the monitor. The footage rolled, timestamp blinking. The doors opened, staff frozen in place. But no men, no suits. He replayed it twice, then 3 times. "Same thing," the clerk whispered. "They weren't real, were they?" Sovar didn't answer. His throat was dry. He moved to the glass doors, staring at the street. Empty sidewalk, a taxi turning the corner, the normal world carrying on as if nothing had happened. In the reflection, he caught it again. That ripple. The faint distortion, like water shifting over glass. It lasted only a second, then gone. The city was sliding into the evening. Neon lights flickered to life along the block, and the smell of damp asphalt drifted up from the street. Dan stepped outside the studio, cell phone pressed to his ear, the buzz of traffic bleeding into the line. Static cracked once in his earpiece, sharp enough to make him wince. He pulled the phone away, glancing at the signal bars. Fine. Nothing wrong. Still, a faint pressure lingered in his ears, like the air had thickened. He lit a cigarette, shielding the flame from the breeze. Across the street, headlights caught his eye. A black sedan, clean and glossy, sat at the curb. 2 men inside. Neither moved. Neither looked away. He held the phone loosely in his hand. The voice on the other end was still talking, but the words blurred. His focus stuck on the car. The still figures inside. They seemed frozen, as if waiting for something he could not see. Dan shifted his weight. The cigarette crackled. For a second he thought of waving, but his hand stayed at his side. He blinked, glanced down to flick ash away. Just that quick. When he looked back up, the car was gone. Not driving down the street. Not easing into traffic. Gone. He froze in place, staring at the empty curb. His cigarette burned down unnoticed, and the voice on the phone asked if he was still there. He swallowed, steadying his breath. He answered quietly. "Yeah, I'm here." He slipped back inside, the thud of the studio door closing behind him. The warmth of the lights and the chatter of the crew felt almost too normal after what he had just seen. Cables stretched across the floor, cameras lined up, voices echoing as people hurried to set up the next shot. He forced himself to blend in, dropping the cigarette in a cup and setting his phone down on a desk. "Is everything good out there?" a crew member asked, tightening a light stand. Dan hesitated. "Yeah, just a car. Thought someone was watching." The man chuckled without looking up. "It's New York. Everyone's watching." Dan managed a half smile, but the words didn't settle. His mind replayed the scene, the still figures, the way the car had vanished. No sound, no trace. Just gone. He rubbed his palms together, noticing the faint tremor in his hands. The metallic taste in his mouth hadn't left. Coffee might fix it, he thought, so he poured himself a cup from the pot by the wall. He sipped. Bitter, strange, almost copper. He set it down after one swallow. The phone on the desk buzzed again. He picked it up, pressed it to his ear. The line clicked alive, then dropped to dead silence. No dial tone. Just faint static, low and irregular, like something pulsing through wires. He pulled the phone away, staring at the screen. Strong signal. No call connected. Behind him, laughter rose from the crew as someone cracked a joke. Normal life carrying on. Yet everything inside him felt tilted. He thought of old accounts he had read, stories of researchers approached by strangers in dark cars, warned off their work. He pushed the thought down, telling himself he was folding folklore into coincidence. Still, the sensation stayed. The air in the studio seemed thicker, muffling sound. Even the busy city noise outside came through faint, as though pressed down by some invisible weight. He took a breath and forced himself back to the table of notes. The work needed him. Focus. He scribbled down questions for the next interview, the pen shaking slightly against the page. But, in the back of his mind, the silence from that empty curb wouldn't let go. It was like someone was still there, watching. The night stretched on. Interviews ran late, cameras whirred, and the hum of lights filled the air. Everything felt routine until the door banged open. A producer hurried in, face tight, voice clipped. "Stop. It's over. Shut it all down." The room froze. Crew members looked at each other, unsure if they had heard right. Dan lowered his pen. "What are you talking about?" "Orders from the top. We're done. Pack it up." The words hung heavy. The buzz of equipment seemed louder now, like a swarm pressing in. Dan's throat tightened. The cancellation was sudden. Too sudden. His chest felt hollow as he thought of the black sedan, the silent stairs. He stood slowly, trying to find words. "Why now? We're mid-shoot." The producer shook his head. No answers, no explanation. Only the same flat tone. From the top. That was it. Dan's ears rang high and sharp. The room felt colder, though sweat dampened the back of his neck. He steadied himself against the table, eyes darting toward the studio windows. He walked outside, needing air. The street should have been crowded. Instead, it felt deserted, unnaturally still. Not even the usual horns or sirens. Just silence. He scanned the curb where the sedan had been hours earlier. A faint scorch mark stained the concrete. Black, uneven. He stepped closer. The smell hit him ozone, sharp and sterile, like air after lightning. His mouth went dry. This wasn't chance. This wasn't business, he whispered to himself, almost afraid to hear it out loud. They don't want this out. The phone in his pocket buzzed. Unknown caller ID. He answered. Only static came through, low and pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. His hand shook as he pulled the phone away. He ended the call, staring at the blank screen. For the first time that night, he knew it wasn't coincidence. It was a warning. Weeks passed. The show was gone, shelved without a trace. No calls from the network, no follow-ups, no explanations. Just silence. At night, he sat on his porch, cigarette glowing in the dark. The street stretched quiet in front of him, empty except for the occasional passing car. Every time a dark sedan rolled by, his chest tightened. He leaned back in the chair, smoke curling upward. His thoughts circled the same point again and again. You tell yourself you imagined it. That's the easier story. But deep down he knew what he had seen. The black sedan. The still faces. The way the car had vanished without a sound. He took another drag, exhaled slow. The night air felt heavy, pressing against his ears. Somewhere nearby an insect chirped, steady, sharp. Then it cut off mid-note. He froze, eyes on the shadows beyond the streetlight. The silence that followed was deep, unnatural, the kind that carried weight. He tapped ash into the tray, fingers trembling slightly. A long breath left his lungs. "I know what I saw," he whispered, the words meant for no one. The smoke thinned and vanished into the dark. and the night stayed still. The street was quiet that morning in New Jersey, damp with a thin drizzle that made the asphalt shine. The Robinsons' apartment building stood at the edge of a row of brick houses, the kind with narrow windows and small steps leading to the door. Jack Robinson sat at his desk near the window, notebooks scattered, pages full of numbers and sketches from his late-night research. Mary moved about the kitchen, coffee in her hand, glancing out the curtain as she often did. She paused longer this time. Across the street, by the lamppost, a man stood. Black suit, black hat pulled low. He was still, like he had been set there and forgotten. She called to Jack, her voice low. "He's there again." Jack turned, leaned to the window. The man did not move, did not look around, just stood, hands at his sides. Jack exhaled through his nose, tired, probably waiting for someone. But Mary kept watching. She noticed the little things. No umbrella even in the rain. No paper, no cigarette, no shifting weight from one foot to the other. Too still. Jack shrugged it off and returned to his notes. But a faint ringing in his ear lingered, and he rubbed at it absent-mindedly. The old desk lamp buzzed louder than usual, the kind of static hum that got under his skin. Outside, a pair of sparrows landed on the wire, then flew away as if startled. The street grew quiet again, unnaturally so. Mary let the curtain fall shut. "He's watching us, Jack." Jack forced a small laugh, though it came out flat. "No one's watching us." But he didn't look out again. Days passed, and Mary noticed the man every morning. Same place, same posture, never speaking to anyone. She would peek through the curtain, hold her breath, then let it drop when his head tilted slightly toward their window. Jack tried to stay buried in his notes. He told himself he was imagining the ear pressure, the faint static in the lamp, the silence outside when the man appeared. But at night, when he closed his eyes, he saw the figure standing still under the lamppost, waiting. Mary pressed him again one morning. "He doesn't move, Jack. He's not waiting for anyone." Jack looked. The man stood under the dripping lamplight, shoes planted on wet concrete. Dogs walking past pulled on their leashes, refusing to go near him. Jack watched until his jaw clenched tight. "Maybe it's nothing," he muttered. But it didn't feel like nothing. By the end of the week, tension sat in the apartment like heavy air. Jack and Mary spoke in short exchanges, avoiding the subject until it forced itself in. She grew sharper, tired of his dismissals. He grew more defensive, pride fighting against the unease curling in his stomach. When their friend Timothy visited, Mary pulled him to the window without a word. Timothy saw the man instantly, leaned closer. "That's not normal," he said flatly. He left, returned an hour later, camera in hand. He parked down the street, rolled the window halfway, and snapped a photo. The click sounded too loud, echoing in Jack's chest like a warning. Inside the apartment, Mary stood still. She noticed the air smelled faintly metallic, like old coins held too long in the hand. Jack rubbed his ears again, pressure building like altitude change. The man did not flinch. He only stood still as ever, as if the shutter had not happened at all. Timothy developed the photo that night. The image came out sharp. The man in the black suit caught in mid-stillness. Hat low, face shadowed, lines of the suit crisp against the pale sidewalk. Jack stared at it under the lamp. The hum of the bulb seemed louder, static, pressing in his ears. Timothy leaned close, whispering, "This is proof." Jack didn't feel proof. He felt dread, cold in his chest, heavy in his stomach. He slipped the photo back into the envelope, hands unsteady. That night, sleep brought no rest. Jack's dreams were full of broken voices, filled with static, black figures at the edges of his vision. He woke with sweat cooling on his skin, heart pounding, unsure if he had really heard the knock on the window. 2 days later, the man disappeared. The relief was sharp but brief. On the 3rd day, he returned. Closer this time, standing not by the lamppost, but across from their own door. Mary whispered, not moving the curtain much, "He's closer." Jack didn't answer. He was staring at the street where a black car idled, no plates on the bumper. The hum reached him before the sight did, a low electric sound that didn't match the still body of the car. His thoughts tangled. Maybe it was real surveillance. Maybe it was something else. His teeth ached from the pressure in his head, a deep, pressing hum. Mary spoke again, steady now. "He never blinks, Jack." Jack watched until his throat tightened. He wanted to confront the man, to cross the street and demand something, anything. He stepped outside, walked halfway, then froze. The air grew dense. Metallic taste filled his mouth. Pressure built in his skull until his knees weakened. He turned back, breath shallow, chest tight. Inside, Mary stood at the window, eyes narrowed. Her voice was almost a whisper. His shoes, they're dry. The sidewalk was wet with rain. Yet the pavement under the man's feet held no prints. Jack's hand shook on the doorknob. He felt the crushing weight of an invisible line he could never cross. That evening, as the street dimmed, a neighbor stopped Jack in the hall. Casual tone, grocery bag in hand. "Why's your friend always waiting out there?" Jack's stomach dropped. He realized then the man wasn't invisible. Others saw him too, but no one else questioned it, and maybe that was worse. The man stopped coming after that week. The sidewalk stood empty again, just neighbors, children, dogs tugging at leashes. Birds returned to the wire, chirping like nothing had changed. But inside the apartment, the silence carried weight. Jack found himself listening for the hum that wasn't there. His ears still rang faintly when the memory came back, like pressure trapped in his head. They moved within months. Packed the notebooks, the boxes, left the street behind. Mary wanted distance, Jack wanted relief, though neither spoke of it much. Timothy kept the photo. It began to circulate among other researchers, passed hand to hand, shown in dimly lit rooms with low voices. Some called it proof. Others called it nothing more than coincidence. Jack looked at the image one last time before sealing it away. The man in the black suit stood frozen on glossy paper, hat shadowing his face. Clear enough to be undeniable, vague enough to explain away. Proof never felt like safety, Jack muttered, though no one was there to hear. Life moved on. Streets filled with ordinary sound again. Children laughing, sparrows bickering over crumbs. But when the nights were long and quiet, Jack felt the static rise in his ear, tasted the faint metallic tang at the back of his throat. He would close his eyes, and the figure stood there still.